नमस्ते दोस्तों, आप लोगों का गोल्ड प्राइस टुडे न्यूज़ में स्वागत है। और आज मैं आपको मेटल्स फोकस के लंदन के एमडी फिलिप न्यूमैन का इंटरव्यू सुनाने वाला हूं। उनकी क्या सोने चांदी के भाव पर राय है उसको बताने वाला हूं। ये इंटरव्यू मैंने इंग्लिश में किया है, हालांकि मैं उसको आपको हिंदी में उसकी खास बातें, बड़ी बातें बता देता हूं। आगे बढ़ने से पहले जो नए दर्शक जुड़ रहे हैं वो चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कर लीजिएगा, और अगर आप सोने चांदी की खरीद बिक्री या कुछ भी करते हैं, अपने वित्तीय सलाहकार की राय से ही काम करिएगा। दोस्तों, फिलिप न्यूमैन के साथ मैंने कई सारे मुद्दों पर सवाल किए वहां पर उनसे, और उनसे जाना कि क्या सोने चांदी का भाव आगे रह सकता है। खास तौर पे उन्होंने जो बातें बोली, उसमें जो पहली बात है वो ये है कि सेंट्रल बैंक की खरीद जो है वहां पर लगातार जारी है, और पिछले 3 साल से वहां पर कहीं ना कहीं रिकॉर्ड सेंट्रल बैंक की खरीद आ रही है। और इस साल भी उसकी खरीद जो है वो बहुत ही हेल्दी है, और इसकी वजह से जो सोने के भाव का लो था वो कहीं ज्यादा हायर हो गया है, और स्ट्रॉन्ग सपोर्ट बेस वहां पर बन रहा है। और करेक्शन जो है 2900 या $3000, वो भी अगर आप इतना भी आता है तो वो भी एक बहुत ज्यादा ऊंचा भाव है। दोस्तों, अगर भाव की हम बात करें तो उनका ये मानना था कि ये भाव भी कहीं ना कहीं एक बहुत ऊंचा भाव है। $3000 भी, जिसको आप कह सकते हैं एक उच्च स्तर है। भले ही ये निचला स्तर होगा, पर ये बहुत ही उच्च स्तर है। साथ ही कुछ इंस्टीट्यूशनल इन्वेस्टर आर विलिंग टू बेट अगेंस्ट गोल्ड, मतलब कुछ इंस्टीट्यूशनल इन्वेस्टर वहां पर खरीदारी कर रहे हैं, और डिप जैसे ही आता है वहां पर खरीदारी चालू हो जाती है। इसके अलावा जियो पोलिटिकल अनसर्टेनिटी है, जो कि डोनाल्ड ट्रंप की अनसर्टेनिटी है, वो भी कहीं ना कहीं एक मार्केट में वहां पर फ्यूल दे रही है। इसके अलावा उनको लगता है कि इस साल 3 बार रेट कट हो सकते हैं, ऐसा उनका मानना है। और $3500 तक, शुरुआत में उन्होंने कहा कि वो $3400 उनका फोरकास्ट है, $3400 तक का, और इसको भी वो रिविजिट करते हैं, और इस साल उनको $3500 का कहीं ना कहीं एक टारगेट मोटा मोटी लगता है। डाउन साइड यानी गिरावट उनको लिमिटेड लगती है। इनका यह मानना है कि मुनाफा वसूली आ सकती है टैरिफ रोल बैक के कारण, और पुल बैक्स आ सकते हैं, और भाव जो है $3000 के नीचे भी आ सकता है। पर अगर इसके नीचे आता है तो वहां पर खरीदारी आएगी, और खास तौर पर ये खरीदारी भारत से आएगी। दूसरी तरफ उन्होंने चीन की जो ईटीएफ की बाइंग है उसको लेकर भी उन्होंने कहा कि चीन से ईटीएफ की वहां पर बाइंग आ रही है, सेंट्रल बैंक की भी खरीद आ रही है, पर जो इंश्योरेंस और पेंशन फंड की खरीद आ रही है वो कहीं ना कहीं वहां पर उनको उतनी नहीं दिख रही है। सिल्वर की प्राइस की अगर मैं बात करूं तो सिल्वर को लेकर उनका ये मानना था कि सिल्वर जो है इंडस्ट्रियल मेटल से वहां पर ज्यादा प्रभावित है, और चांदी ने पिछले साल 20% की छलांग लगाई थी और 2012 के बाद सर्वश्रेष्ठ प्रदर्शन किया था। ईटीएफ में भी वहां पर पॉजिटिव इनफ्लो है, लेकिन इस साल जो है सेफ हेवन जो डिमांड है वो सोने में ज्यादा है, जबकि चीन की जो इकोनॉमी है उसकी धीमी गति और औद्योगिक मांग की चिंता चांदी पर भारी पड़ रही है। और चूंकि चांदी इंडस्ट्रियल मेटल भी है और औद्योगिक धातु भी है, तो इस कारण उसका जो है कहीं ना कहीं असर उसके ऊपर पड़ रहा है। इसी कारण उनको लगता है कि गोल्ड सिल्वर रेशियो वहां पर बढ़ रहा है। इस इंटरव्यू को मैं हिंदी में, जो भी हमारी बातचीत हुई है वो मैं यूट्यूब पर ट्रांसक्रिप्शन में हिंदी में डाल दूंगा दोस्तों, ताकि आप लोग जो है उसको ठीक से, वहां पर हमने क्या कुछ बातचीत की उसको आप देख सकें। अब मैं इंटरव्यू आपको सुना देता हूं दोस्तों, वहां पर फिलिप न्यूमैन। Hello, friends, welcome. And we are discussing the gold price trajectory in near future. And we have with us Mr. Philip Newman, MD, Metals Focus, London. Hi, Philip. Welcome to our show. So, how do you see this recent rally in gold price? What is your view on that?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me back on your show. I feel as though every time I'm on, gold is much higher, and there's always so much to talk about. I think when we look at the gold price, not just over the past week, but just over the past few months, I think so much of that relates to safe haven activity. but the safe haven motive has changed quite significantly. So if we think back to last year, then a lot of the safe haven buying that we saw, even from institutional investors, was related to the Middle East, uncertainty there. Would we see contagion to other markets? What would that mean for the oil price and for global growth and all of these, geopolitical and macro factors? Then what we saw really with as Trump was campaigning, and then with his win in November, we saw that concerns about what he would do with tariffs really came to the fore. And that became, I think, the principal safe haven driver that we saw for institutional investors. And of course, with the announcement on 2nd of April, which really shook the world, and then we saw things ramp up very aggressively. What we've also seen in terms of the gold price strength is reflecting also the health of central bank gold demand. We've had 3 years of either record or close to record central bank demand. I think buying in the first few months of this year has also been pretty healthy. That's also quite remarkable given where gold has been. And I'm not sure if central bank demand will push the price higher, but what it does do is really help to cement that floor. And I think what we've seen is that the lows for gold have basically been moving higher. And that in itself is an incredible achievement. And, when we talk about, corrections in gold, maybe we're thinking that a price of whether it's 3,000 or 2,900, whatever it may be, but these are still astronomical highs or prices to think that's a low. Really quite stunning. And I think just the sentiment around gold is very positive. Few investors are willing to go short in the market. And again, what we've seen, if we focus over the past couple of weeks since the tariff announcement, what that's meant for the US dollar, concerns about US treasuries, I think that really has shaken the market and has shaken institutional investors about what is a safe haven. And so I think you are seeing more buyers potentially coming into the gold market. I don't think they're gold bugs. I don't think they're pro gold. They're looking for an asset class that will deliver. And where the price is today, they don't regard that as the highs. So I think there is more money that is potentially coming in. Even the reduction or the drop we've seen overnight, that seems quite well defended. So again, we're seeing those lows get higher as well. Even if buying in the likes of, say, India and China, the two big heavyweights in the gold market will back off. We'll see how long that backs off for. Do investors or do retail buyers get used to these prices? So really the dynamics, I think, are still very, very positive in the marketplace.
So, Philip, now we see is uncertainty around Trump's statement and swing in Trump's statement and U-turn from his statements is the biggest uncertainty in the market right now, because previously he said he will fire Jerome Powell. Then he said yesterday that I will not fire and he will complete his term. On China, we say he softened his stand. So is swing or U-turn is the now biggest uncertainty in the market?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. But I think the uncertainty goes back as well, because first of all, he announced tariffs. Then he made a 90-day pause when we saw the bond market crisis really come to the fore. So you just don't know what will happen next. He said that in terms of, say, Ukraine and Russia, he was pushing hard for a deal. Now he's saying he's getting impatient with that. You just don't know where that uncertainty will manifest itself next, whether it's from a geopolitical potential, what's he going to do in terms of Israel and Gaza, or will it be from a macro standpoint? And maybe if we do see, say, inflation start to pick up, and we'll know in the next couple of months, I would say to you, not just because of the tariffs, but also because of his attempts at deportation. Now, I think from deportation, that's got a lot of news, and probably rightly so. But I don't think the number of people that actually been deported has been that high. So maybe we can put that one to one side. But I think from an inflation standpoint, we should see the impact of the tariffs. But we'll see is also he suddenly exempts certain products. Will other ones come to the fore? Will there be a new argument with Mexico or Canada? So I think you're absolutely right that it's just that huge uncertainty. And I think if the economic data doesn't go in his favor, then maybe he will renew attacks on Powell as well. And even if he doesn't fire him, maybe he'll try something else to undermine him, or maybe the concerns will grow that maybe the Federal Reserve will start being aware or more aware of the US government in its policy. Does that question its independence? So I think, there's a lot there that can still continue. I know we've had a bit of a rally in the dollar, I think, overnight, but I think there's still significant and material structural concerns about the dollar as well. And just because overnight, again, he's talked about lower tariffs for China, I think China will negotiate differently with Trump. Maybe that will frustrate him. So again, it just adds, as you said already, that uncertainty. And I think that will keep investors very focused on gold for the time being.
How many rate cuts do you see this year from Fed? And are these rate cuts are already discounted in this $3,500 rally?
Well, I think, the Fed, I think, is looking at, I think, up to 3 rate cuts, say over 25 basis points. Other banks, or some of the banks, when I was in New York last week for the World Silver Survey launch, one institution internally was calling for 1 rate cut later this year. So, so I think that it varies quite significantly from that point of view. The Fed has said that they are keeping a very close eye on inflation, and they've got a balance, haven't they? That, what's the outlook for inflation? Is growth going to slow because of everything that's going on? But unemployment is still pretty low as well. So I think that, to your question, I think, up to 3 cuts are priced in. Having said that, if the market was to actually, it's a funny one. I think to one degree that it is priced in, but at the same time, I think if you were to see a cut at the next meeting, that would surprise the market, and that could give you a bit of a boost as well to gold. So there is just considerable uncertainty out there. I will be surprised if the Fed doesn't cut at all. But at the same time, if inflation starts to get away and Trump holds the course in terms of tariffs, and then inflationary expectations become more entrenched, then maybe the Fed's got to at least say, we're going to pause. That could give you a bit of a hit to gold potentially. But then the counter argument is, well, maybe we see more safe haven, because what does that mean for growth and as a hedge against inflation? If you think back a past couple of years, when we saw very high inflation after the invasion of Ukraine, the markets were more concerned about what the Fed's interest rate policy was than inflation. So that, the relationship between gold and inflation can sometimes break down. It's not linear. So it is quite mixed. But I think the big takeaway is that the markets remain positive towards gold. But I think if you did see the Fed say, we're going to pause for this year in the current climate, I think that could give you a bit of a hit from a negative point of view in the gold price.
Have you expected $3,500 this year?
Well, if you had asked me a year ago, if I'm honest with you, as you know, we sell 1 year forecasts and 5 year forecasts. We did not have this price in our forecast. I'll be honest with you, and I'll be honest with your listeners as well. Um, and if you'd asked me a year ago what would happen at 3,000 gold, which now seems a very long time ago, I would have said to you, we would have had a lot of investors selling into that. Um, and I would have felt quite convinced at that point. You know, I've had 30 years in the market, and that was my experience and expectation. But clearly, we didn't have any of that. And it goes to my earlier point that the market is very positive, and there are very few investors that are willing to go short or materially short in the market. Um, but I think, you know, as we've got into this year, then yes, we've started to look at the market and call it higher. Um, and I mentioned I was in New York last week speaking to some really important financial institutions. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, you know, these aren't gold bugs, but they are pretty pro gold. Just in their what's the word? The detached assessment of the macro backdrop. So I think, you know, from that point of view, we have revised our price forecast higher. It's something we continue to work on.
So, Philip, do you see any correction this year because, or which factors can correct the gold?
Well, some of those we've touched on. You know, if the Fed changes course, then I think that will give you a bit of a hit. I still think, you know, even at these prices, and we saw a bit of a move down overnight, but really it wasn't that substantial in the current market. I still think there's open for profit taking. You know, if Trump is persuaded to ditch tariffs, you know, if he can claim a win and then say, you know what, we've got what we want, we're quite happy, and we're going to just get rid of the tariffs, I think that could give you a significant boost to equities, and that could give gold a hit. I would say that scenario is quite unlikely, unfortunately, at the present time. But I think, yeah, there's always room for profit taking. But even if you have that, where is the low? Is it 3,000? Is it 2,900? It's a very high low. And so I think even if you were to have that kind of correction, those lows, I think, are still very well defended. If you were to get sub 3,000, I think the buying in the likes of India would be very, very significant, for example.
So, Philip, is China buying a big amount of gold? Is there any evidence you are seeing? And how do you see China's strategy against the US in the ongoing Trump tariff war? Because US only implemented tariff, but China is returning Boeing. China is banning the American films. China is doing many things to counter.
Sure. I think to answer those questions in reverse, if I may, if we start with the tariffs and the trade war, I just think I think that the Chinese approach is a bit more nuanced, more selective. They already stated once I think they went up to 125%. They weren't going to go any higher. But you made a very good point about the fact. Yes, they stopped at 125, but they have other opportunities as part of that trade war, and I think that will continue. I think just because Trump has said that he expects to lower Chinese tariffs, I mean, in my humble opinion, and I have no inside information whatsoever, I will be surprised if China reacts. Maybe they'll wait to see something more tangible from the US before they react, but who knows? That's purely my speculation. For the gold market, for China, we've seen good buying on the ETFs. You've seen that already this year. So I think that's been quite an exciting development. And, you know, over the months, whether it's this year or last year, I'm not sure about 2025 has been any announcements, but we had that at least last year in terms of the central bankers saying they had bought gold. They were one, I think, of the principal buyers last year. And I think just generally speaking, from a retail standpoint, from a retail investment standpoint, the Chinese market remains pretty healthy. As I said, reflected in those ETF buying of gold in China.
And there may be some buying from Chinese insurance and pension fund companies, as China allowed their 1% of fund. So
Um, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think, speaking to my colleagues in Shanghai, because we have an office there, um, I think that activity so far has been very muted. I don't think that's a big part of it so far, at least that's our understanding.
yeah, yeah. And why this silver is not rising? Because gold touched 3,500 and silver has not even reached to $35.
Sure. I think there's a few factors there. I mean, we've got to put into context. So I mean, last year, silver was an incredibly strong performer. The price rose by 20% for the annual average, best annual average since 2012. So there were some good things going on there. Even from an investment standpoint, you had the last year the first increase in ETFs on an annual basis in about 3 years. The CME, the net longs on there were pretty decent as well. So good activity. But I think what we're facing with this year is that there are, to your point, the ratio today is about 100 as we're speaking, about 101. Yesterday, with those fireworks and gold, the ratio got up to 105, the gold silver ratio. But it's been trending higher for a few years now. But I think there are factors specific for gold and specific for silver why we're seeing the ratio. So on the gold side, as we've been talking a lot today, a lot of the safe haven bids has favored gold. Gold's got that central bank gold demand, and so that's really helped it. For silver, I think because, as you know, it behaves both as a precious metal and an industrial metal. I think it's the industrial qualities are coming to the fore. So it's been affected by expectations or concerns over the health or the future prospects of the Chinese economy. That has struggled for some time. The stimulus measures that the Chinese authorities announced late last year, I think, underwhelmed to some extent. And of course, now with the tariff or concerns about global growth, and then specifically you've got China and the US going head to head on tariffs, that has really raised concerns about the health of the Chinese economy. You've had some banks recently come out with their new GDP forecast for China, much lower, some of those aggressively low. We hope they don't come to fruition, but at the moment, I think they are weighing on silver, and that's why you see the ratio where it is now.
So now, what is your outlook on gold and silver? How do you see from here in terms of prices?
I mean, gosh, it's probably the hardest questions we can get asked now, isn't it? And it's uncertainty. Even though we live and breathe this market, I think for gold, I think, again, we've had that correction overnight. I don't think that's the end of the rally by any stretch. For all the points I've made, I think you could see, revisiting 3,400 doesn't seem so difficult. Where's next? 35 seems quite possible. For silver, we do think that would take it higher. We would think the ratio will come down a little bit, but while you've got concerns from a macro standpoint, I think that will weigh on silver, at least in the short term. But you would have thought, getting up to the 34s or 35s, I think seems likely.
Philip, I am requesting you. So we are running a campaign, plant a tree, because of this global warming and all happening. And we are requesting our viewers, as we cross the 1 lakh subscriber mark on our YouTube channel. And we are doing this from last summer. In India, right now is a summer season. So we are requesting them to plant a tree, because after this there is a monsoon, and the plant can be bigger. So can you request our viewers to plant a tree? So that will be very helpful.
Sure, I think I would certainly encourage that. If that's something you're doing across the country, I think it's fabulous. I know in the UK, I mean, I live and breathe the gold market or precious metals, but to get out into the woodland is fabulous, and it helps me to decompress before I come back to gold at 3,500. So I think I would certainly encourage your viewers to do that.
Thank you so much, Philip. It was very nice talking with you. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate it as well, and I'll speak to you soon. And who knows what gold will be when we next catch up.
तो दोस्तों, ये फिलिप न्यूमैन थे. मैंने इसका हिंदी डिस्क्रिप्शन में डाल दिया है इंटरव्यू का, और मैं कोशिश करूंगा कि ये ऑटो डब कर दूं मैं यूट्यूब में, और आपको अपने आप पूरा इंटरव्यू हिंदी में सुनाई दे. थैंक यू सो मच दोस्तों, आप सभी का.